Ancient Iraq, a land of myth and legend, home to some of the greatest cities of the Bible.
Well, it's the cradle of civilization. It is one of the most important areas in the world.
Now, after decades of war, pioneering archaeologists are returning to Iraq. Our cameras have unprecedented access as they unearth buried treasures and discover the real world of the Old Testament.
Western civilization only kept memories through the Bible.
I think it's very difficult to pick apart the myths and the legends.
This time, archaeologists uncover two superpowers of the ancient world, Nineveh and Babylon.
Nebuchadnezzar wanted to make Babylon the greatest city on earth.
How did the epic struggle between these two infamous cities shape the ancient world? And why do we know them from the Bible as cities of sin? Iraq, the cradle of civilization. 2,500 years ago, two great cities and their empires dominated this ancient land: Babylon and its great rival, Nineveh. Babylon lies in central Iraq, on the banks of the river Euphrates. Nineveh sits much further north, beneath the modern city of Mosul. According to the Bible, both cities were sinful places, ruled by tyrants who were brought down by the wrath of God. But is there another side to these stories?
The Bible was a potent vehicle of memories which were reworked, filtrated as you wish, but that was the only connection until the first travelers started telling people back in Europe what they saw. They were reflecting on these clearly massive ruins in front of their eyes, and so myths were recreated.
Nineveh is the oldest of the two cities. It was founded by a people called the Assyrians. The Bible says that Nineveh was a vast metropolis, so large it took 3 days to walk across it. The walls stretched for miles, protecting grand palaces and temples. So how much of this is true? Was Nineveh as big as the story describes? Engineers rebuilt key sections of Nineveh's once mighty ramparts in the 1970s, based on what they would have looked like. But today, little remains. In 2014, Islamic State tried to erase the city's ancient ruins from existence. Khairuddin Nasser is the head of antiquities in Mosul. He and his team are determined to rebuild what was lost and discover the true scale of this ancient city.
هذه المدينة بنيت بشكل هندسي رائع جدا. أبنيتها بنيت بطرق هندسية وعمارية لا تخطر على بال أحد.
Khairuddin investigates a huge structure called the Shamash Gate. It's one of the few sections of Nineveh's city walls that survived the destruction.
هذه البوابة تعد واحدة من أهم البوابات الأثرية في مدينة نينوى، مدعمة بالعديد من الأبراج، وهي تعتبر واحدة من أضخم تلك البوابات.
Our cameras have been granted rare access to the Iraqi team as it explores this lost wonder. Here at the Shamash Gate, Islamic State looters dug this tunnel underneath the ruins, hunting for hidden treasures to sell on the black market. Engineers must fill it in to prevent the whole structure from collapsing.
ينجو أي مدخل من مداخل البوابات هذه من تخريب وتدمير وتجريف عصابات داعش الإرهابية. بوابة حتى بوابة شمش تم عمل أنفاق تحت هذه البوابة.
The archaeological repair work is also an opportunity to discover more about the size of the ancient city. Nineveh was so big, it needed many entrances. On the other side of Mosul lie the remains of the Mashki Gate. Here, Fadl Mohammed Hodder and a team from the University of Pennsylvania hope to uncover its foundations.
هذه البوابات كانت من مادتين رئيسيتين اللي هما الآجر والحجر الحلان.
This image taken before the destruction shows how the reconstructed Mashki Gate used to look. It was a miniature fortress, more than 80 feet high and 80 feet wide.
أي شخص لمدينة نينوى من الجو يحس أو يتراود بذهنه الإحساس بعظمة هذا البناء، خاصة عندما يرى مساحة هذه المدينة والأسوار الضخمة التي تحيط به.
So how large was this city? Archaeologist Niccolo Marchetti from the University of Bologna belongs to an Iraqi-Italian team at Nineveh. He uses drone technology, backed up by excavations on the ground, to piece together the city's layout.
What you see here is a representation of the elevations. We call it the digital elevation model.
Ancient inscriptions reveal how Nineveh had more than a dozen gates.
The earlier texts speak of 14 gates, and then the number grows until 18. But until now, only 5 of them have been known archaeologically.
Incredibly, archaeologists are still finding more.
We were very lucky in 2021 to identify a new gate here, almost halfway between the river and the Shamash Gate. And we just started excavation here.
The aerial survey reveals how the city was surrounded by fortified walls, nearly 7.5 miles long.
The main defensive wall was 35 meters thick, and minimum today, it's preserved to a height of 15 meters. But of course, it was much higher. If you multiply this, the amount of labor which was needed to make this wall was simply mind-blowing. It was an impossible technical feat.
It's not hard to see why the biblical writers believe that it took 3 days to walk across Nineveh. The Assyrian capital was a mega city, one of the largest in the ancient world. It covered an area of more than 2.5 square miles. So why is Nineveh so big? A clue lies in the east of the city, where Niccolo's team is helping to rebuild another of the city's massive gates. Here, investigators uncover an inscription, hidden from view for more than 2,500 years. It reveals the name of the king who built it, a mighty warrior called Sennacherib, one of the most notorious rulers in the Old Testament.
This is the standard inscription by Sennacherib, and it says, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, king of the world, erected the inner wall and the outer wall of Nineveh and built it as high as a mountain.
In 705 BC, Sennacherib inherited the Assyrian throne. His father had been killed in battle, bringing shame to the royal family. So Sennacherib decided to move the imperial capital to Nineveh and start again. Niccolo's investigations reveal how Sennacherib remodeled Nineveh's existing settlement on an unprecedented scale. He doubled its size and even diverted the Khozer River to run through it.
This is not encampment surrounded by walls, empty as so many people have surmised. Our researchers have shown that this was a real thriving city. Wherever we look, we find buildings, and this is extraordinary.
Archaeologists think that Nineveh was home to more than 100,000 people. Sennacherib's ambitions had no limits. He decided to turn Nineveh into one of the biggest cities on Earth. Only Babylon was comparable in size and scale. So who was Nineveh's mighty king? And did his city live up to its reputation in the Bible? The Bible says that Nineveh was a great city, but steeped in sin. So God sent a prophet, Jonah, to preach against the people of the city and save them from their evil ways. At first, Jonah refused. He tried to run away and ended up at sea, where he was swallowed by a whale. But when the whale spat him out, he returned to Nineveh, and the people repented. It's a famous tale, but the Bible never says exactly why the city needed saving. So what was Nineveh like to live in? Tradition says that Jonah was buried on this hill in Nineveh. Today, a mosque dedicated to him stands here. It's now in ruins, destroyed by the same militants who tore down the city's ancient gates. Intriguingly, investigators are uncovering the remains of a vast palace beneath it. It's one of several built by the Assyrian kings in the city. Fadl Mohammed Khadr investigates the most famous of Nineveh's royal residences, Sennacherib's Southwest Palace.
نحن الآن في قصر سنحاريب، فحقيقة تحفة فنية لم نجد لها نظيراً.
The Southwest Palace was the jewel in Sennacherib's crown. Raised high on 160 layers of brick, it had 80 rooms, adorned with sculptures and nearly 2 miles of decorated wall panels. Sennacherib wanted this to be the greatest palace on earth. So was the biblical story of Jonah a rejection of Nineveh's extravagance? Western archaeologists excavated this palace in the 19th century, driven by stories of the Bible and Jonah. Today, little remains above ground. But flying overhead reveals the sheer magnificence of this legendary building.
موقع القصر مميز جدا، مسيطر على جميع أجزاء نينوى، ويمكن يعني لو نتصور في ذلك الوقت يمكن للملك أن يقف في أي مكان ويرى بوابات المدينة بالكامل والداخل والخارج منها.
Fadl thinks that Nineveh's palaces were designed to make a powerful statement.
حقيقة بنى سنحاريب هذا القصر مذهل. مثل ما تفضلت، نعتقد أنه بناء هذه المدينة كانت لرغبات شخصية.
So was Nineveh just a royal playground? Niccolo Marchetti thinks that there was more to Sennacherib's city than grand palaces. He has uncovered the remains of a mysterious tunnel beneath the city walls.
We opened an area here, and we were very surprised to understand this was a water inlet, a canal. The tunnel is 42 meters long, but we are there 8 meters below the surface.
The canal was part of an immense network, carrying water to Nineveh from the mountains.
Nineveh was at that time undergoing a drought, a severe drought, and this is why they worked so hard for bringing waters from very distant fields. This is an incredible feat by Sennacherib.
Niccolo has also unearthed evidence of where Sennacherib found the expertise to pull off these pioneering projects.
We found a library of literary texts, and the contents are incredibly interesting. There is no administrative aspects here. This is a library belonging to a learned individual.
Niccolo and his team found fragments of around 50 texts. But these are just the tip of the iceberg.
At Nineveh, there was another library, which is the Library of Ashurbanipal, which is an immense library featuring tens of thousands of tablets. So this was a truly imperial capital, and the intellectuals flocked to Nineveh from all around the empire.
Nineveh was very different to the decadent city of sin portrayed in the story of Jonah. So why did the biblical writers place his story here? Did something happen later to spark the city's evil reputation? A clue could lie in a stone carving from inside one of Nineveh's palaces. It shows an Assyrian king and his queen relaxing in a garden, while behind them, the head of an enemy hangs from a tree. Did this paradise city have a dark side? New discoveries reveal how Sennacherib transformed Nineveh into a city of astonishing sophistication. But did everyone embrace the ancient Assyrian way of life? The Assyrians, unlike the writers of the Bible, believed in many gods. So could this be why Nineveh was seen as evil? Our cameras have been granted rare access to the Mosul Museum, where Khairuddin Nasser and a team of specialists are trying to save the remains of Nineveh's ancient past. Islamic State militants blew up this building and smashed many of its greatest treasures.
نقوم بمحاولة إعادة ما يمكن إعادته من القطع الأثرية اللي تم تدميرها على يد عصابات داعش الإرهاب محطمة بشكل كامل. فعملية إعادتها تكون عملية صعبة جدا. تبدأ من عملية الجمع والترقيم ومن ثم محاولة إعادة كل قطعة إلى مكانها الصحيح.
These feet belong to the statue of a winged bull, a popular Assyrian deity known as a Lamassu. The creature's body represents speed and strength, but each one has a human head, a symbol of wisdom and intelligence. These celestial beings were hugely popular deities. Archaeologists find Lamassu at all the major Assyrian cities. The Assyrians saw them as guardians.
توجد الثيران المجنحة في بوابات ومداخل القصور الآشورية دلالة على عظمة وهيبة هذه، ويعتبر من الأمور السحرية اللي تطرد كل شيء خبيث يحاول الدخول إلى القصور.
Archaeologists have discovered an astonishing 43 of these colossal statues at Nineveh alone. So where did these fantastic beasts come from? A clue could lie with another, far older city. Sebastian Ray is digging the ancient site of Girsu in southern Iraq. A familiar creature has been uncovered here.
This was found at the site of Girsu. This is a small stone sculpture of a mythical, supernatural being with the human head and the body of a bull. It's probably the earliest known representation of these supernatural beasts, those Lamassus.
This sculpture is more than 1,000 years older than the ones from Nineveh.
This is, in a way, a sort of prototype of the Assyrian Lamassus, those great beasts.
Sebastian thinks it reveals how the Assyrians saw the cultures that came before them.
This confirms this long tradition of myths, legends that were copied time and time again throughout the thousands of years of the history of Mesopotamia.
Mythical beasts were hugely popular throughout the ancient world. The Assyrians had the Lamassu. The Egyptians had their own version, the Sphinx, a fiercely protective lion with the head of a pharaoh. Even the ancient Israelites, who believed in one God, had cherubim, heavenly creatures who act as guardians and bearers of God's throne. The Assyrian religion was similar to most other cultures of the time. So why does the Bible single out their capital, Nineveh, for special condemnation? A clue lies in the reliefs that once adorned the walls of Sennacherib's palace. They depict his forces attacking the city of Lachish in the kingdom of Judah. Soldiers advance behind siege engines, while defenders hurl missiles at the attackers. But against Sennacherib's war machine, resistance was futile. He destroyed Lachish, flayed alive its leaders, and led its citizens into captivity. The story of Jonah was written well after all these events happened. Sennacherib's conquest of Israel made his capital the enemy in the eyes of the biblical writers. But the story is also a morality tale. Jonah warned that the city would be destroyed. A prediction that came true. In 612 BC, Nineveh's great rival Babylon razed it to the ground. The Assyrian Empire was broken and never recovered. But Babylon has an even worse reputation in the Bible. Why did the biblical writers not celebrate the city that had freed them from Assyrian rule? In the 7th century BC, the Babylonians destroyed Nineveh. Their capital, Babylon, now became the greatest city in the world. But for the writers of both the Hebrew and the Christian Bible, it was a den of wickedness. According to the Old Testament, Babylon's infamy stretched back to the dawn of time. Nimrod, who founded ancient Uruk, supposedly built this city too. His people set out to build the Tower of Babel, a building so tall its height offended God. He punished the people of Babylon by making them speak different languages, so they could no longer work together, and the tower was left unfinished. It's a fabulous story. So was Babylon really the original Sin City? Today, Osama Hisham from the World Monuments Fund and archaeologist Ammar Al-Tahi work to rebuild Babylon. Despite the city's infamy, investigators know surprisingly little about its origins.
No more than 3% of the city is excavated. It's only a scratch of the surface.
Osama and Ammar are currently restoring a temple dedicated to the goddess Ninmak. Above ground, it's a modern reconstruction, built during the rule of Saddam Hussein. Iraq's notorious dictator wanted to appropriate Babylon's glorious past for his own ends. But the reconstructions stand on ancient foundations.
We dig these test pits to understand more about the original walls of the Temple of Ninmah. Most of the modern walls standing over original mud bricks walls and original foundations.
Excavation trenches like this reveal how Babylon's original buildings were made from mud brick. The team has had to figure out the Babylonian recipe for mud brick to make their repairs more authentic.
We tested several methods, like putting pieces from reed and animals dung, but in the end we found the best way to make mud bricks is mixture from different material, sand, soil, and water, and straw. Then after that we put it under the heating of the sun.
If the Tower of Babel did exist, it would have been constructed from mud bricks like these. Some think that the city's giant ziggurat might have been the inspiration for the biblical tower. But there's a problem. Today, it's a heap of mud brick, and no one knows exactly how old it is. The city's high water table makes it very difficult for archaeologists to find Babylon's earliest buildings.
If you are seeing the area, it looks like a desert, but the water problem in Babylon is very big because the city is sitting on the river Euphrates.
So archaeologists must hunt for evidence elsewhere to reconstruct the city's origins. According to Genesis, Babylon was one of the world's first cities. But today, most archaeologists believe it was a relative latecomer. Assyriologist Stephanie Daly thinks Babylon first rose to power around 1800 BC under a king called Hammurabi. Hammurabi was a great builder and may even have constructed the original ziggurat. He transformed Babylon from a small regional city into a huge metropolis.
Hammurabi was a great king. He dug wonderful canals to facilitate transport and so on. And by building the canals, he made it possible to irrigate a larger expanse of agriculture.
This influential ruler also produced one of the earliest lists of laws ever discovered. Known as the Code of Hammurabi, its principle of reciprocal justice could even have influenced the Bible's eye for an eye rule. Archaeologists have found copies of the code across the Middle East. It's impossible to prove exactly when Babylon was founded, but its long and glorious past could explain why the writers of the Bible saw it as one of the world's first cities. Stephanie thinks that Babylon's fame also drew criticism, which may explain the origins of the Tower of Babel story.
It sounds as if they're mocking the fact that people are babbling away and can't understand each other. And that, to me, tells how cosmopolitan Babylon was.
Other myths from the time suggest that the biblical authors may have intended their story as a slight on a city so proud of its vast architecture.
We've now found a text which seems to be making fun of the people who build towers out of mud bricks so they fall down all the time. And of course, the Tower of Babel, the ziggurat at Babylon, did fall down irreparably in the end.
So why did the biblical authors focus so much on Babylon's flaws, if everyone else admired this great city? The answer lies with its most notorious king, Nebuchadnezzar II. In 586 BC, Babylonian armies conquered Jerusalem and deported its population. His campaign would earn Babylon its terrible reputation. Who was Nebuchadnezzar II, and how much about his reign is true? In 586 BC, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar II, conquered the city of Jerusalem. The Bible says he ransacked the city's temple and exiled its people to Babylon. 2,500 years ago, Babylon was an awe-inspiring sight. The exiled Judeans would have entered the inner city along a huge avenue called the Processional Way that led to its main entrance, the Ishtar Gate. Babylonian engineers built this gate from baked brick instead of mud brick and covered it in images of animals to amaze those who came through. For the exiled Judeans, it was the entrance to a prison like no other. What can this mighty structure tell us about the man who brought them here? Was Nebuchadnezzar the megalomaniac of biblical fame? Our cameras have been granted special access to Osama Hisham and his team as they rebuild the Ishtar Gate.
Ancient Babylon city had several entrances, but this was the most impressive one. It's really a wonder of the ancient world.
Over the centuries, this colossal monument has been plagued by Babylon's destructive water problem.
The big problem that we are facing here at Ishtar Gate is the high level of groundwater. And this was also what Nebuchadnezzar was facing. The water was eating the bricks away. So he buried this gate and built another one on the top of it.
To safeguard the gate, the team must ensure that water does not become trapped inside the brick walls.
This is the repointing, which is filling the gaps between the bricks with the special mortar designed by our experts. This mortar is preventing the rainwater from coming inside the monument and also letting the water from the inside to escape outside.
The reconstruction work gives Osama an insight into the mind of the king who commissioned it.
If you can see the monument, you can see how ambitious Nebuchadnezzar was. Nebuchadnezzar II wanted to make Babylon the greatest city on earth.
But Nebuchadnezzar wanted a city that was beautiful as well as big. In the 1900s, German archaeologists discovered thousands of broken glazed bricks that used to cover the gate. They shipped them to Berlin, where specialists painstakingly reconstructed Nebuchadnezzar's crowning achievement in its original glory. This is the awesome sight that would have greeted the Hebrew exiles as they began a new life thousands of miles from their homes in Jerusalem. Museum curator Helen Gries protects this ancient megastructure.
If you look at the Ishtar Gate today, it's impressive. The scale of it.
Today, Helen and her team undertake crucial work on the processional way.
This monitoring we are doing now, we are doing every 2 years. The glaze is highly corroded. We have to really carefully see if something's changed.
They begin by taking high-resolution photographs of each individual brick. By comparing them to images taken in previous years, they can check for signs of damage to the fragile glazes. Helen focuses on one of the ornate lotus flowers that line the walls.
The white one is not really glaze anymore, it looks more like powder. Luckily, there were no new pieces which were falling down, but you can see this area is highly corroded, especially the white glazes, which need a conservational treatment.
Helen's forensic analysis of the bricks also reveals how Nebuchadnezzar's artists pioneered a new technique to give the tiles their bright blue color.
You need quite a lot of chemical knowledge to produce such brilliant colors. They use the color agent cobalt. It's around 1,000 times stronger as the coloring agent as a copper oxide, which was used in Assyria.
But Helen thinks these groundbreaking monuments also reveal how Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be seen. Assyrian palaces are covered with images of war and conquest. But these Babylonian walls are alive with mythical beasts. The lion represents Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. The bull is the symbol of the weather god, a dog. And the white dragon is the avatar of Marduk, chief god of Babylon. There are more than 575 animals on these walls. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to show himself as a devoted follower of the gods. But to the biblical exiles, the king must have seemed anything but pious.
Nebuchadnezzar was fighting more than 40 years as a king. He was always in a battle, so it was not that there was no war in Neo-Babylonian time.
Nebuchadnezzar was far from the liberator of the ancient world. He used the loot from conquered cities like Jerusalem to make Babylon great again. So what was life like for the exiles inside this monumental prison? And how did Babylon really fall? The Bible describes Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II as the ultimate city of sin. It tells us that he conquered the population of Judah and exiled them to Babylon. According to the book of Daniel, the exiles endured a succession of terrible hardships in their new home, including when one king threw the prophet Daniel himself into a lion's den. Ultimately, God brought divine retribution to the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar descended into madness, and a new people, the Persians, conquered the city. Many historians believe that the earlier parts of the Bible were written in Babylon by exiled priests. For them, exile was a traumatic experience, which explains the Bible's negative portrayal of the city. Did all Judeans see Babylon that way? Helen Grease finds a clue among the thousands of cuneiform fragments found at Babylon. This tablet is a rare glimpse into what life in exile was like.
There are only very few documents of the Judeans deported from Jerusalem to Babylon. This one is dating to the 13th year of the kingship of Nebuchadnezzar II to the year 592 BCE. It's an outstanding example because it mentions the king of Judea, Jehoiakim.
Jehoiakim was among the thousands of Judean exiles sent to Babylon. Archaeologists discovered this reference to him in Nebuchadnezzar's royal archive.
It's a list with different rations of oil given to different people, and one of them is the king of Judea.
Nebuchadnezzar granted Jehoiakim an allowance of sesame oil from the royal storehouses.
Jehoiakim gets really a large amount of oil. If it was only for him or for his family done, it looks for sure the king was well cared for.
As a former king, Jehoiakim enjoyed special treatment. But lower-ranking Judeans also took to life in Babylon. When the king of Persia, Cyrus the Great, conquered the city and allowed the exiles to return home to Jerusalem, many decided to stay.
What we can see is that many of the Judeans still stay in Babylonia, even if they could go back to Judea. Our picture of Nebuchadnezzar is very much handled down by the Bible, and they paint a very negative picture. This picture is, of course, showing one perspective. The time of Nebuchadnezzar II was for sure not a peaceful time, but he is doing what kings did before him and kings did after him.
Hundreds of years after Babylon fell, the book of Daniel emerged. It was an apocalypse story, warning that God would punish those who disobeyed him, just as he had done to the sinful king Nebuchadnezzar. The fierce rivalry between Babylon and Nineveh shaped the ancient world. The writers of the Bible saw the rise and fall of these cities as cautionary tales, a sign of what happened to those who went against the will of God.
The historical reality of ancient Near East was quickly forgotten. Western civilization only kept memories through the Bible. The interplay of ancient and modern myths in Mesopotamia is like a constant feature of the land.
But now archaeologists are uncovering the true achievements of these remarkable civilizations, rebuilding lost wonders and resurrecting rich and ancient cultures. Their investigations will take many years, as Iraq continues to recover from decades of war and terrorism. But the Babylonians and the Assyrians of Nineveh left us an incredible legacy. They preserved the stories and the culture of the first city builders, the ancient Sumerians, whose echoes can still be heard in 3 of the world's great religions. The truth behind the lost cities of the Bible is the story of the dawn of civilization.